Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this hearing. Thank you, Justice Breyer and Justice Scalia, for spending so much time with us and having so much patience with our questions. Before coming here, and as you may know, I'm one of the more junior senators. I was Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, didn't have the honor of knowing Mr. Root for about 20 years, and the highlight of those 20 years was the cases that I argued before your court. So I have been waiting for the day.
This is payback, huh?
when I could interrupt you as mercilessly and relentlessly as you did me, and give you as hard a time. But fortunately, in those cases, I think there were 4 in all that I argued, you decided the right way, so I'm going to avoid the temptation. But I was very impressed and moved by your explanation as to why you think it is so important for the public to understand and appreciate what judging is and what role it plays in our system. And I agree with you totally that not only is there the need, but there now is the lack, really, of that understanding. And so I guess I say, as not only one who's argued, but also as a former law clerk who sat through a year of arguments and learned so much about the system in that process, why not open it to video recordings? Why not, in the federal courts, give the public the benefit of seeing it firsthand in your court and other federal courts, and so appreciate really the quality as well as the diversity and the extraordinarily, often excruciating difficulty of what you do?
I'll start. Senator, when I first came on the court, I was in favor of, you're just talking about televising the arguments, right?
Correct.
Not the conference. You know, the Brazilian Supreme Court, they televise their conference.
I would never presume or think of televising the conference.
Nor would I.
I was initially in favor of televising, but the longer I've been there, the less good an idea I think it is. Now, the justification usually put forward is we want to educate the American people about what the court is and whatnot. Now, if I really thought the American people would get educated, I'd be all for it. If they sat through days of our proceedings gavel to gavel, boy, would it teach them a lot. They would learn that we're not most of the time looking up at the sky and saying, should there be a right to this or that? That we're doing real law, the bankruptcy code, the internal revenue code. People would never again come up to me and ask, as they sometimes do, Justice Scalia, why do you have to be a lawyer to be on the Supreme Court? The Constitution doesn't say so. No, of course it doesn't. But 99% of what we do is law. It's stuff that only lawyers can do. And if the people would learn that, it'd be a great piece of education. But for every 10 people who sat through our proceedings gavel to gavel, there would be 10,000 who would see nothing but a 30-second takeout from one of the proceedings, which I guarantee you would not be representative of what we do. So they would in effect be given a misimpression of the Supreme Court. I am very sure that that would be the consequence, and therefore I'm not in favor of televising it.
But it would for high school students or even middle school students and for the general public who were interested in an important and pertinent case, provide a means for them to see what right now only a very limited audience can view because of the size of the court.
Yeah, but for those who are interested in it for those intellectual reasons, surely the tapes are good enough.
Well, the tapes, with all due respect, and I understand your argument, don't convey in the same way with as much interest the kind of debate, the back and forth, the visual sense of the action in court, and I know and you know really how dramatic it can be.
Well, we just sit there like 9 sticks on chairs. I mean, there's not a whole lot of visual motion. There really isn't. It's mostly intellectual motion.
Well, I can say it certainly is gripping if you're answering the questions. Justice Breyer, do you have a different view?
No, I sort of, a little, but I think we're conservative. And you would be too if we're there, if you're there. The court has lasted the country well and served the country well over a long period of time. We're there for a short time. We're trustees. And we don't want to make a decision that will be non-reversible and hurt the court. So you start there. And then sometimes I think, you know, when we had the term limits case out of Arkansas, I just wish people could have seen that. It was such a good case. I mean, you had Jefferson and Story on one side and Madison and Hamilton on the other side, and it was the term limits.
Yeah.
It was, and what you saw is everything evenly balanced with the precedents and what are the, I won't go into the case, but if they could have seen that across the country, people would have been able to see in that oral argument 9 individuals struggling with an important constitutional question that would have been good for the court and everybody. All right, so what's the problem? Well, one problem is that we're a symbol, and if it were us in our court, it could probably be in every criminal case in the country, and you would get rid of what? What do we do it with jurors? What about the criminal witnesses, et cetera? And you don't know what happens with symbols. Or would people come up with a misimpression, namely the oral argument's 5% of the case, 3% of the case. It's really done in writing. And they don't see that, and more importantly, people relate to people. You relate to people, I do. When you see them, they're your friends or you're not your friends or whatever. But we're making decisions that are there to affect 309 million people who aren't there. And in our minds, we have to take those 309 million into account. And will that come across? And then there is the problem that Justice Scalia mentioned, which is, Nino says quite right, how do we, you know, you can make people look good or you can make them look bad, depending on what 30 seconds you take, and it's already cult of personality, and let's not make it worse. We wear black robes because we are speaking for the law, not for ourselves as individuals, and that's a good thing. So add those up and you say, I don't know. I would like to know more. I really would. There are places that have it and don't have it. There are courts that have it and others that don't have it. There's Canada that has it. There's California in some situations. You have 100 different situations in respect to that. Why can't we get some real information, not paid for by anybody that has an interest in this, but Pew or some of the foundations, and see what happens to attitudes, to judicial attitudes to others. So what you're getting, I think, and maybe eventually, you know, it's going to be there's no other way to see things but visually, and everybody's doing that, and then it won't even see, it just seem weird what we do now, and then it'll all change. But before that time, I think, when that's a little boring, but I think information is something that would make me easier. And until I become easy about it, until we become reasonably convinced that won't hurt the institution, you're going to get a conservative reaction. That's what I think is the truth of it.
Senator, it's maybe unfair to put this question to you since you're such a youngster here, but do you really...
That's the best thing that's been said about me in a long time.
Do you really think the process in the Senate has been improved since the proceedings have been televised?
Well, just as you took a pass earlier, I think that there are mixed views, but in general, I think that openness and transparency improves institutions. And for all the reasons that you have so eloquently talked about your role in educating the American public, I think that an audio and visual recording of Supreme Court proceedings would potentially do the same. And I think that whatever the results of televising Senate proceedings, and I was only facetious when I said I would take a pass, I do think that it has been a step in the right direction of providing more transparency and disclosure and understanding on the part of the public. Now, I'll let you and the public be the judge of how it views us, but I think in general, Americans should understand the challenges as well as the role that their institutions face. And since my time has expired, and I want to thank you again for being here, and I am not at all dismissive of the points that you've made. On the contrary, I have great respect for them, but perhaps we can provide you with some more information that would be persuasive in the advantages and the positives in those kinds of greater availability or accessibility. So thank you for being here today. And I also want to thank you for raising the issue of state courts, because I am one who has spent a lot of time in state courts. You often have to consider the results of state courts. Indeed. And all too often, we in this body fail to understand how integral the state courts are to dispensing justice in this country. Thank you.